I'm going to focus on the environment, and the Policy Commission opens with a statement that climate and environment breakdown must be returned to once the crisis eases, and recovery must be a green one. It's good that this is referred to as a priority, but some argued that COVID-19 is not separate from climate and environmental breakdown, and so this cannot be abandoned while the pandemic is supposedly dealt with. Arguably, causes of COVID-19 are related to how we are, for example, destroying wild habitats or treating long-distance travel as a right. I know people in the UK who are still taking cheap flights to North Italy for a weekend skiing in February, despite reports of COVID-19 deaths there. And treating the economy as something more important than and not to serve human and indeed all life and health when easing lockdown is both illogical and unacceptable. Not waiting until the crisis eases is also important, as development proposals, planning applications, and proceeding with large carbon-intensive infrastructural projects are certainly not waiting. One could argue that they're taking advantage of COVID-19 to smuggle through proposals which are heavily opposed. I'm thinking not only of HS2, but also a £170 million plus carbon-intensive fixed track for a guided bus in my hometown of Cambridge. This will destroy local woodlands and biodiversity, and there is scant evidence that it will reduce car use. A decent, frequent, flexible electric bus service would be a much quicker solution, serving many more communities, as Ian has already illustrated. Meanwhile, in another part of town, a proposal has just been published for a new suburb of 8,000 homes. This number represents 14% of the current homes in Cambridge, 1 in 78 of which is reported to be empty. Also, the proposed 20,000 new jobs there clearly indicate an expected rise in commuting. This is an area where water levels are already dangerously low. The Policy Commission identifies the 2019 manifesto as part of Labour's proud record on climate and environmental issues. One of the things that most impressed me about the manifesto is the way in which it linked economic, social, and natural issues, and recognised how policies to address one had to address all. The Policy Commission recognises that ecological renewal must be accompanied by solidarity and social justice, and demands that living standards must improve, and that Britain should be built in a way that is both low in carbon and rich in good jobs. But this begs a number of questions. Improving living standards for who? Last year's manifesto talks about levelling up, which suggests it's the living standards of the relatively poor which need enhancing, of course. However, it's critical for our environment and nature more widely that the gap between the poorest paid and the highest paid worker becomes smaller by higher earners earning less, as well as low earners earning more. And then, what constitutes a good job? One which is meaningful and purposeful, one which pays fairly, has security, and leaves the worker time to enjoy a life beyond paid work. Jobs which do not discriminate, but are open to and encourage women, disabled people, Black and minority ethnic people. Jobs that all people can combine flexibly with caring responsibilities and non-paid work activities. Jobs that do not require a time-consuming and carbon-intensive commute. They should be all these things and more. Nationally and internationally too, we need measures which replace gross national and gross domestic product, which only account for financial transactions. Currently, cleanups of or litigation against environmental pollution count as a positive in the balance, while unpaid domestic and care work, which the Office for National Statistics estimates as representing more than a notional £1 trillion a year, counts for nothing. Domestic and care work, which is more often done by women and which is increased by environmentally aware housekeeping, not to mention pandemics. Cooking from scratch, using reusable nappies, separating the waste streams, all take more time and effort, however rewarding the outcomes. We need to value unpaid work and ensure that this is evenly distributed so that women, the mainstay of unpaid cleaning, cooking, caring, have the opportunity to engage in other work. Local measures or indicators can capture value other than financial. I remember in the early days of planning for a sustainable 21st century, after the Earth Summit in 1992 through Agenda 21, Seattle developed an indicator which would show how a local waterway had recovered by counting the number of swans who return. We also need to tackle that great elephant in the room, rampant consumerism. We need to be paid fairly for work done so that we can pay fairly for products we buy. So that women in faraway places, often risking their life to sew t-shirts with, I've heard them say this, with their blood, and at huge cost to the environment, in pesticides used, in water abstracted, so that they can also receive a fair wage. But we also need to drastically reduce the number of things that we buy and the frequency with which we buy them. Clothes, computers, mobile phones, domestic appliances. We need to identify other ways to value ourselves and others than by the make of a car or a dress. And to be able to find ways of repairing and repurposing. Care work, low paid and unpaid, needs to count as green work, along with jobs identified in the Policy Commission, in nature conservation, home insulation, and wind turbine manufacture. In fact, a recent report by the Women's Environmental Network and the Women's Budget Group refers to professional care work as green jobs. And as well as retrofitting homes to be energy efficient, we could train people for jobs which retrofit outside spaces so that all households have gardens which combine biodiversity, play, and food in beautiful ways. It was good to see in the last manifesto that there were to be targeted bursaries for green apprenticeships for disadvantaged peoples and groups, such as women, Black and minority ethnic people, and disabled people. I know from the work I do on gender and environment that women are so far not well represented in these green jobs. So conscious efforts to make these actively welcoming to all are very important. Respecting and sharing the caring is critical to this. For example, making longer paid paternity leave and shorter working weeks standard. It's good to see the Policy Commission put sustainability and equality at the heart of its policy. There are many initiatives that can contribute to socially just transition and a feminist Green New Deal, while simultaneously reducing carbon emissions, improving quality of life, and promoting social justice. COVID-19 has demonstrated how modern living arrangements don't always facilitate sociability, just as we know that they are not environmentally sustainable. People who live on their own, who live in cramped accommodation with no outside space, who live on polluted streets, or who live with violent and otherwise abusive partners, groups which feature disproportionate numbers of women and Black and minority ethnic people, the poor, the elderly, the disabled. They could really benefit from imaginative housing arrangements which respect privacy and maximize flexibility and the benefits of community, such as co-housing, with communal spaces, energy efficiency, shared equipment and functions, such as laundries and kitchens. Extending from this, widespread community-owned or supported transport, businesses, farming and energy would all help to achieve an environmentally sustainable and socially equitable society. Through food, for example, it's so shocking, it's already been mentioned, that people in our country, the world's 6th richest, go hungry. The generosity of food donations, however welcome, doesn't compensate for people not having secure and dignified access to sufficient nutrition and culturally appropriate food, and food which has been farmed in ways that don't destroy nature. It's difficult to capture in a linear narrative just how much these social, economic, and environmental initiatives and changes will need to be woven together to secure, in the Policy Commission's words, ecological renewal, solidarity, and social justice. But I'd urge the Labour Party and the National Policy Forum to treat them as indivisible and inextricably linked. No trading, one without the others just won't work. In fact, just like a healthily functioning ecosystem. Please make your views known to the MPF to ensure this. Thank you.